Three, two, one. Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by the movie Hangout. Behind the scenes of making Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. That's the topic of this video. But before I get to it, before I get to all the cool stories of what Mark Hamill went through to make what is not really even arguably the best Star Wars film ever made, but it is the best Star Wars film ever made. I mean, especially compared to the new trilogy. Before I get to that, if you want to just go on below and click subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Okay, so let's get to it. New article here on StarWars.com. There's a lot of cool websites that give, stories behind the scenes and the making of, but this particular article I really appreciate it because it's got great photos. I'm a type of guy, I need to see good visuals. I just have to. Hopefully I'll get a better visual of myself. Look how shiny I am right now. But anyway, that's the best I could do right now. It's the best I could do. All right, so it's got great behind the scenes, never before seen pictures of Mark Hamill making Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, which is the best Star Wars, hands down. So it's the most physically grueling of them all, Mark Hamill says on the Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. A lot of times, the more difficult a movie is for the crew as well as the cast, the better it is for the audience. The actor behind Luke Skywalker takes StarWars.com on a journey through filming the Star Wars sequel in time for the 40th anniversary of its release. The farm boy from Tatooine had grown up in February of 1979. Mark Hamill was ready to return to the role of Luke Skywalker, arriving in the unforgiving snowscape of Finns, Norway, for his first day of shooting on a frigid location shoot that would transport viewers to the planet Hoth. Tell you what, Norway is freaking cold in general, and in the wintertime, I can't even imagine how bad that would be. For 4 months, he had trained in karate, fencing, kendo, and bodybuilding, preparing his body for the strenuous stunts the new script called for. Hamill had always been game to do his own stunt work, like swinging over the chasm inside the Death Star, but the sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, would prove to be the most physically demanding and isolating experience of his long career in the role. Here's a great behind-the-scenes photo of Mark in the X-Wing fighter right here. He's got a little mini clapper right there, and I don't know. I just think that's a really cool shot. Speaking by phone from his home outside LA, Hamill exudes the affable charm and graciousness of a man who's been embraced by Star Wars fans for decades. I've been talking about this so much. My kids mouth the answers I give because it's been 40 years, Hamill says at the outset, but he's game to take another spin through his memories of filming The Empire Strikes Back as we celebrate the film's 40th anniversary later this month. Hamill knew during shooting of what would become A New Hope that the movie was the start of a trilogy, and that was one of the reasons I tried to emphasize Luke's immaturity, he says. I get mocked a lot for, but I was going to Tusha Station to pick up some power converters. He says, his voice going higher in an exaggerated whine. But I did that intentionally to be able to grow and make him as much of a clueless teenager as possible, because by the end of the film, he has found his purpose in life, and he's so profoundly changed, Hamill says. Behind the scenes, everything was different as well. It was a really pivotal time in my life because my wife, Mary Lou, and I were expecting our first child, Hamill says. Nathan Elias would be born once the Hamills were back in England shooting in June of 1979 among the cast and crew. There was a marked difference in the attitudes, he recalls, because in the first one, nobody knew about us or cared. I remember passing the script around to my friends saying, "Hey, you got to read this. It's the craziest thing I've ever been involved in." There was no social media, there was no security, there wasn't any focus on this unknown science fantasy film, but everything changed after that. So in Empire, suddenly we had to be really careful. Here's a picture of Mark on set with his makeup after he was attacked. And here's one of the crew members, probably the director. And this right here, this jacket was actually a limited edition jacket only for the crew. And they recently I think North Face did a recreation of it. They only did like a limited amount and they were autographed. They were really, really cool. So 30 feet from the hotel. From the start, arriving in Finns, I want to say, Hamill and the crew were under tremendous pressure, battling the brutal elements of an extremely harsh Norwegian winter that included blizzards that shut down the train lines and essentially stranded the crew at their hotel. They had scouted a location that was going to take us 90 minutes to get to, where there was a glacier that had blue ice that photographed blue on camera, he says. I was very excited to see it, and then, as happens in filmmaking, it was one of the worst snowstorms in I don't know how many years. We wound up filming right outside the lodge. I mean, if you turn the camera around, you saw people on their balconies having their hot chocolate as Harrison Ford and I were acting next to a dead Tantuan. About 30 feet from the door of the hotel, Hamill endured take after take, lying in the snow as the injured young rebel, glimpsing the specter of his foreign master. It's funny because if you see the photos where the crew is included, they're all in goggles and masks, and you know they're just completely bundled up. I would stay bundled up right until we had to shoot. Then the protective gear would come off, and obviously the wardrobe is designed to look good, but not actually be practical in terms of keeping you warm in those conditions. And I remember I was supposed to be sort of groggy and semi-conscious when Obi-Wan comes to me in the vision. And they'd say, get a little more snow on his face. And Graham Freeman, the chief makeup artist, would scoop up snow and pack it so it would be in my eyelashes and eyebrows, Hamill says. You'd go as long as you could, and then you'd try to get in a tent and get warm until they needed you again. Certainly a challenging environment. I mean, North Africa could be warm, but you can handle better than bitter cold, he said, comparing the blistering sun to the Tunisia location shoot for Tatooine to frigid Hoth. And here they are right here, kind of getting warm. Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and there's the filmmakers right there. Harrison wasn't even supposed to come to Finns. Hamill notes a change in the shooting schedule that reunited the core trio as the production began to experience its first hiccups and delays. He was going to do all his scenes back at Elstree in England, but because of the weather altering our schedule, he came out. And Carrie Fisher even visited, even though she didn't film. She just wanted to hang out, and it was fun to have her there. And here they are right there. Isn't that cool? I always thought that creature, I don't know, what do you think? I think that creature is just awesome. It's like a real thing. Like it's like a real like puppet thing that it's not CGI. I just think that looks way better than the CGI. While the three friends spent some time together between takes, Hamill says the demands of the story, pulling the core trio in opposite directions, meant most of the shoot was quite isolating for the actor. It was a very solitary experience in many ways because Luke was separated from Han and Leia. And I'd see Carrie and Harrison around the studio, and I'd see them in dressing rooms now and then, but it made me sort of nostalgic for the days we were all together, running around the Death Star. When we were all three together, it was really a lot of fun. And in this one, I mean, for months, I was the only human being on the call sheet. Actor Mark Hamill, role Luke Skywalker. And then under props, it was, snakes, R2-D2, unit, Yoda, and so forth. Over the course of the shoot, Hamill performed so much of his own stunt work, he was later made a member of the British Stunt Union. Although, on occasion, the insurance company would step in to deter him from, say, tumbling through the fake glass window on Bespin to a sea mattress below. It's really cool. You see that iconic scene there with Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, and look at all the old mattresses right there. Isn't that cool? And then the walls and then the lights, they were kind of miniaturized to make it look like the space was actually bigger than it really was, using forced perspectives and depth perception. Just so cool. Like now this would all be just like green screen, and I don't know. I think that this is what makes this good, you know? And I'll tell you something, in those days it changed so as I've gotten older. But in those days I wanted to do every possible stunt I could, Hamill says. Empire was the most physically grueling of them all because of the lightsaber duels and all that. The film was the first time Hamill would take up the weapon of the Jedi for a proper battle with Darth Vader. And the duel itself, although delayed on the shooting schedule after he injured his thumb, diving away from an imagined AT&T on a salt-covered soundstage the day his son was born, required far more acrobatics and choreographed footwork than the straightforward sparring between Vader and Kenobi in A New Hope. And here is Mark Hamill, and then here's the actor that was in the suit of Darth Vader, and they're doing like practice dueling here. I worked with Peter Diamond, who was a stunt coordinator, and Bob Anderson, who doubled Vader, who was an Olympic fencing champion, so there was intensive training. We had worked out a sequence we were all particularly proud of, and I'm talking weeks and weeks of this. And we said, let's bring George Lucas in. We brought George in to look at what we had done. He said, well, Hamill says his voice shifting into his best Lucas impression for a beat. You can't take your hands off a lightsaber. You can't hold it in one hand. And we said, what? He had choreographed stuff where, we did spins around and we did various things. He didn't want us to ever take both hands off the hilt. So we had to go back and re-choreograph the whole thing. That's that makes sense, why you wouldn't want to do one hand. Because if you have one hand and you're doing a duel, especially with a lightsaber that can cut through anything, if you go like this, if you flick it down, you just cut your leg off. If you go like this, you just cut off the top of your head. So if you have both hands, it's like you can't really kill yourself. You know what I mean? So that actually makes a lot of sense. That's pretty smart. I was very lucky to have Peter, who was so skilled as a stunt coordinator, and Bob. He was someone who he could counter if I ever made a mistake. He could counter it and incorporate it into the routine, and we could keep going. It takes an expert to make a novice look good. Here's Mark Hamill underwater right here. For the scenes inside the Bacta tank, Hamill got a crash course in scuba diving. They took me to a private school that had a big enough swimming pool because I had never been scuba diving before. And I said to them, well, I don't think it's any big deal. I'll just breathe through the tank. What's the big whoop about that? And they said, well, you'd better try it. So I went into an all-girls school, and they had a swimming pool closed as I had my lessons. But I remember one point looking up in the second floor balcony, and I don't know, 50 girls all up there giggling and pointing and laughing. And the stunt inside Elstree was a far cry from the chilling experience on location. Hamill found it quite relaxing. It was wonderful because the water was warm enough to be comforting, and it was very much like being in an isolation tank. Super cool. There's behind the scenes of the Muppet right there with Yoda. And then it goes on to talk about him working with Yoda. Among the final scenes to be shot were Luke's training on Dagobah. The practical effects that brought Yoda to life were brand new at the time, a feat of skilled puppetry, but also gears and motors that would often require tinkering on set. We had rehearsals with Frank Oz, who was the voice. And then it says, and Frank and his crew, Wendy and Kathy, were so talented, but it was lonely because they were buried in the trench when they were shooting. And there's him with the Muppet. I just think the Muppets are 100 times better than the CGI. I mean, do you agree with that? I think everybody does. I don't know why they don't use Muppets. I mean, use CGI to maybe like, if there's a tear in the rubber or something, smooth it over, but Muppets are so good. I mean, I just don't know why they don't stick to that. But, it goes through just the basics of that, and I just think that this article is absolutely fantastic. If you go over to StarWars.com, type in Mark Hamill on Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, it'll come up. Absolutely fantastic. If you're really into movies, into making movies, and into the behind the scenes of classic important films and film history, you'll love this one. Well, anyways, thanks for watching. And if you want to get future rants, reviews, or original content, click subscribe. Later.